Okay, we're here today with Professor Peter Fox as part of the OHBM Oral Histories series. So thank you very much for coming along today, Peter. So I'd like to start by asking you about your background and how you became interested in neuroimaging.
Okay. I'd say the starting point was in college. So I got a liberal arts degree, and at the school that I was in, it was St. John's College in Annapolis, and it was an unusual school. Everyone took 4 years of math, 4 years of science, 4 years of literature, 4 years of philosophy, and everyone had to write an essay each year to go to the next year. And for 4 years in a row, I wrote my essay on theory of knowledge and was very interested in the scientific method and what it means to understand things, what it means to experience the world. And knowing I wanted to go into cognitive science or neuroscience, something like that. And about that time, articles started appearing in journals and being covered in Scientific American about what the Danes were doing with single photon studies. And they started off right away with language studies and identifying that there was a lot going on in the frontal lobes during language listening that nobody anticipated, and that the right hemisphere was involved, which no one anticipated. And so at that point I knew that I wanted to study people, that I figured the only real way to do that was to go to medical school and to become a clinical neuroscientist, and then I could do this kind of work.
Great. And so, what do you see happening with neuroimaging in the US these days? In the area that I'm most involved in and the sort of grants that I review, so I do a lot of grant reviews, what I'm seeing as a strong trend, pushed both by the investigators and by the funding agencies, is using imaging as a demonstration of the neurobiology of treatments. And the expectation is that if you're going to test a new treatment, if you're going to do a clinical trial in a neurologic disorder or a psychiatric disorder, that you won't be funded unless you can establish the neurobiological mechanism. And imaging is the way to do that. Okay. And so it's moved, at least in the areas that I'm most engaged in, it's moved from being really basic science to clinical neuroscience and the interface between the treatments and the theory. And so I think that's a really powerful and appropriate role, and a way of moving neuroimaging into demonstrably helping humankind at large. So I think that's a very important and powerful direction that the field is going. And what research or other contributions are you most proud of in your career?
So I'd say two areas that I'm pleased to have been involved in. We're both at about the same time, and one is doing the original studies demonstrating that blood flow and metabolism are uncoupled or engaged in a very complicated relationship, and that those observations gave rise pretty much immediately to the development of functional MRI, and in particular the prediction of the bold signal, that the people who described it predicted it and cited the work that we had just published and said, if Fox and Rakel are correct, then that would predict this, and we should get a signal like this, and that was correct. And now bold fMRI has become the dominant technique for brain mapping. And so the lineage there is really quite clear, and so I'd say that's a lot of fun. And then another area that I've been really pleased with how well early ideas evolved and were adopted is introducing standardized coordinates. And so when I started doing mapping studies, right away I was unsatisfied with the ability to say where we were,
And I looked around, and there weren't many examples, but people were mostly naming things by gyri. And that to me seemed not enough. And so I spent time looking for alternatives and came across Taylor-Act's 1967 atlas and some papers referencing that. And so developed a way of putting the images I was acquiring into Taylor-Act space and published that method and encouraged people to adopt it. And so ultimately that has become the standard. And so really everything is published in standardized coordinates, originally Taylor-Act coordinates, but then now 1988 Taylor-Act and MNI, and there's various versions, but still they're translatable one to another. And so the format that we all publish and analyze our data in, I have the opportunity to introduce. And so that's real fun. I enjoy that.
That's really impressive. Yeah, and you played a part in the creation of OHBM. What was that like, and how did you imagine OHBM would be like?
So that's actually a pretty good story. When I was just starting out in San Antonio, I'd been working on the brain map database for a few years, and so trying to develop a data sharing mechanism that used standardized coordinates and gave people a way of sharing their data, sharing their results, if not their original data. And so got funded for quite a few years to bring people to San Antonio. And what I focused on was bringing people that were having the most influence on methods development. And so we had 2 days of methods talks, always in the same organization. Right? So it was algorithms for data analysis, and so Carl Friston always ran that session. That was a half-day session. And there was a session on databasing, and I ran that, and there was a session on spatial normalization, and Lancaster ran that, and there was a session on merging different imaging modalities, and Ron Mangan ran that, right? And so we did that year after year. And after about the 3rd year, people said, this was a meeting of about 200 people, and I got grants to bring people. And the people that kept coming year after year said, we should open this up to a bigger community. Yep. And I said, that's fine with me. And they said, you do it, Peter. And I said, no, I like doing meetings this size. Yep. And I'll do one later, but I don't want to do the first big meeting. And so Bernard and Per Roland, Mazoyer and Roland, said they would do it, but they wanted guaranteed support because they didn't know how to do it. And so everybody there, Maziota and Friston and Frakowiak and all the Leslie Ungerleider all said, we'll bring our labs. If you put it on, I can bring 10 people, I can bring 10 people. Everyone said, we'll open it up, but we'll all agree that we'll come and we'll populate the meeting. And so with that kind of agreement, Bernard and Per went forward and did it. And then that just kicked it off, and it's rolled since then. So.
And what have you found most rewarding about your involvement with OHBM?
So OHBM, I've been to many different meetings, and it's not just my opinion, I think it's a very widely held opinion that the standard of science at OHBM is the best of any meeting that I've ever been to across all disciplines. It's consistently extremely high, cutting edge. So that's one thing, is that it's very sophisticated, very high expectations. Clinical meetings are not this good by a long shot. They are not. Another thing I think is the inclusivity of this meeting, and it's been that way from the start. We have mathematicians and statisticians and physicists and engineers and psychiatrists and neurologists. Like, everybody comes together. That's very unusual. And the third thing that I think is really fun about this meeting is the international scope of it and the gender balance. It's like, this is, many clinical meetings, many clinical societies are not very gender balanced, right? that they're male predominant, a lot of them, particularly imaging. That's 80%, radiology is 80% males. And this meeting is pretty much 50-50. And so that's very unusual. So I think there's a lot of unusual things about this meeting.
And what memories stand out when you think about your experiences with OHBM? Or attending OHBM?
So this is probably not the answer that you want. The first in Paris was a great meeting, and it was really, really exciting. But having been the council chair and being very involved in several meetings as council chair, and having been local organizer and involved in that, I have to say that even though the science is great, the social aspects of this meeting and the opportunities to get together with people year after year at dinners and in really amazing venues, those really stand out. Hosting, being the council chair in Toronto, that was quite amazing. That was really a lot of fun, and I definitely remember we got sponsored to host a party. Just the council chair hosted a party, and that was a spectacular party. So we've been to a lot of really outstanding social events involved with OHBM.
Yeah.
So
I certainly have a number of OHBM friends that I only see at the conference year after year, and have developed these relationships. And what changes have you seen in OHBM over the years?
Actually, I'm as impressed with what doesn't change as with what does change. Certainly the recent changes of much more social media outreach and proactive engagement of young people, trying to attract people into this field and making a very complicated field as approachable as it can be. High marks for that. That's really an excellent initiative, and honestly I think OHBM is doing that better than any other organization that I've been exposed to. It's very proactive, it's very positive. But to me equally impressive is that the overall concept of the meeting, the organization of the meeting, how the program committee approaches the meeting, just the style of the meeting was created early. And if you went to the first OHBM and you went to the current OHBM, you would see strong similarities. That the intention of the meeting and what is attempted, what's being done, giving you the most cutting-edge applications, the most cutting-edge methods, trying to span cognitive neuroscience, clinical neuroscience. That was from day one, and that really creates an outstanding feel, flavor, and content for this meeting. And so I'm as happy with what has persisted as with what has evolved.
Great. And an easy last question then. So what do you see as the future for neuroimaging?
So I mentioned earlier that I think neuroimaging has a huge role in treatment development.
Yeah.
And I expect that to continue. Yeah. Another direction that I really think the field will have to push on and be open and kind of aggressive at bringing people in is pushing down into the basic neurobiological mechanisms underlying the imaging signals that we have. Yeah. And so collaborating with people working in animal models and working with techniques that are more invasive than our techniques, that optical techniques, that we need to do, and we need to really encourage scientists working at that level to bring their work to OHBM. So I think those are directions that are important for us to go.
Professor Fox, it's been great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.